So you get to the point where you say, who sold it to the natives? Nobody. How could the natives sell it? They couldn't. How come it happened then? Because the intelligence games players back then knew how to play the game. And what they did is they said, okay, now we own it. And how do you know they own it? Because the sheriff was going to keep you off and we're going to fence it. Okay, you didn't do anything about it then, and now you are where you are. They say, did the natives better understand the true position of man on earth? Sure they did. Isn't ownership by agreement? Of course it is. If all the men and one woman agree to rape, was it right? Would it be right? What? What did they say? You just said that the right to ownership is by agreement. The Indians agreed, and the white man agreed, and the white man's government agreed, and the sheriff or whoever of the area that was making the rules agreed, and so it was agreed to. And they say if all of the men and one woman, and now that's all the men, that's 50%, and then one woman agreed that rape was right, would it be right? What are they saying? They're saying, well, basically they said, how is right determined? By a majority. So then, if you get what they're trying to get across to you, that whether every man and 50% of the women agree that rape was right, rape would not be right. In other words, they need you to look at it and say, how is right determined? By majority? No, it isn't. But it is in this country, kind of. It's by law. How is right determined? Right is right, and you know it, and I know it, and everybody knows it. But if we can get a law passed that'll give us some benefit, then for sure pass it. Then they go on and say, how is the value of a thing determined? How is the value of a thing determined? Is determined by the true market value? Is it determined by the true value, market value, or perceived value? The Dominion and intelligence game players found that a thing had a value equal to its perceived value, and the perceived value can be manipulated. Now, where did we... okay, we know that, but how did we get there? They're talking about moving wealth around. They're talking about wealth can be moved around. Oh yeah, okay, that's where we were. So now we know that the value of things or wealth, if you want to look at it that way, can be moved around because we have money and we have laws. All of a sudden, things can be moved around by law or with money, and that wealth can be moved around. Plain and simple. It's pretty straightforward. If you have a tree family and you have a person that's growing food, and you have a blacksmith, and you have those people, and they decided that when they had the agreement that they would use a coin that the blacksmith made, and the number of coins you had was the number of promises that you had so you could get food and stuff. That at the beginning of that process, all of a sudden the wealth could be moved around. Like somebody could rob every single family of their money, and then they'd have all the money, and all of a sudden they're wealthy, and they didn't do anything. They didn't do anything but take the money. That the value or the wealth can be moved around, and you need to understand that. So, okay, value, the moving wealth can be moved around. We got that understanding. So then they say the third concept, should labor ever have been placed on the economic market? What's the true value of a man's labor? The moving of wealth neither created nor reduced wealth, unless it was invested in something that created wealth, of course. Remember that fact also as we go on with this topic. The moving of wealth is the key area where the game players play. Now, you just heard me say that if somebody came in and robbed all these families of the coin that the blacksmith made, all of a sudden that person who robbed would have all the money and would have all the promises of food and lumber and whatever he wanted, he'd have it because he had the coin. Now, that wealth was in the families and in the promise, and all of a sudden it was put into money and then it was moved around. So they say that the key is that this is where the game players play. Wealth is power and power is dominion. We won't even begin to enter that arena. There is, in truth, no need to delve into all the games played by the game players. The need instead is to know how wealth is created and lost. When that understanding is used to look at how our country handles the economics, the games will begin to stand out and glare at you. Now, that was what they said they wanted to do. So to review, they say now we know that we can increase our wealth, maintain our wealth, and or lose our wealth in this country we are building. Why do we go into that dissertation? If you want to be wealthier in this country, you must create something of value using as little non-renewable resources as possible, or renewable resources. If you are a wealthier country, you have more. Sounds simple, doesn't it? Well, if you want more in your made-up country, you have to create something then. What is the best way to get something created in the best way economically? You reward those who can do it, right? You reward those who can take the resources that we have and make something out of them. That's so obvious it seems stupid to say. Then who do we, right now in this country, reward economically? Farmers? Farmers, they took natural resources and they grew food. Miners? Miners are taking the natural resources out of the ground and making metal and, Fishermen? Fishermen are feeding you, taking the resources of food and making food out of it. Lumbermen? Inventors? Nope. And they say, nope. And you say, what? Why not? And they say, game players. Let us show you why not. Okay, now what did they say? They said, you're supposed to reward those who are making your country more wealthy. Right? And everybody says, yeah, well, of course, and they can see that. And they say, okay, then who are you rewarding economically? Are you rewarding the farmers? Nope. Miners? Nah. Fishermen? Nope. Lumbermen? No. Inventors? Well, some, but not very many. And so then, without saying anything at all, you look at it and say, who are you rewarding? Lawyers? The people that move money around in the stock market? People, every single one of the places where people are making big money, they're game players. They're overchargers and they're game players. All of them. So what are we doing? And this is what they say all the time. Who are you rewarding? Oh, you're rewarding the game players. Why would you do that? Why wouldn't you reward like a farmer? No, you reward the game players. You reward the person that's in the market. They have these little games that they do. They buy up lots of farm product and then add their increase overcharging, and then they take it. Now, they didn't grow anything. They didn't store anything. They didn't do anything. They just took the money they had and bought something and added a charge to it. So they're, it's like they're not producing anything and they're taking your money. So those are overcharges. So if you followed us so far, you know that there are two kinds of resources. There's renewable and non-renewable. These two become one of the sources for wealth along with knowledge and labor. We know, too, that this wealth can be increased, moved around, or reduced or lost altogether. Now we will show you that there are three classes of people that make up this economic picture we are building. Again, we must remind you that they're not true classes. We're only saying classes in the sense that you can see who we're talking about by the classification. In other words, there's no class. We're just talking about a certain group. And what we're going to do is use these classifications to help you see more clearly the games of man. We said we would get to the moral and ethical part of the economic system later. So now the next thing we're going to do is talk about the three classes of what you'd look at is the three classes in an economic system. And when you see those three classes, you begin to see what it is they're pointing at. So the first of the three groups, or three classifications we're going to talk about is the productive class. And that first group is those people that by their effort increase the wealth of the example country by taking natural resources and labor and the intelligence, the understanding of how things work, and making something that has more value. So this class includes those who increase the value of our natural resources by mining, manufacturing, growing, and more efficient harnessing of whatever available energy there is. It is also composed of those who are involved in invention and research, since there is where the waste and losses could be cut significantly. Cutting losses is the same as creating wealth if you understand the concept. The harnessing of renewable energy is the same as creating wealth, and you can understand that too. And that's the creativity that you're dealing with people. Take you back to the comment that they had on children and who raises children and children, how important they are and why they're important. They're one of the three things that raises the wealth of a country. Why? Because they furnish labor and they furnish ideas. They have creation, and the creation part of it may be the most valuable thing in the world. And so you could have a child who, in the system that we have now is trashed, and in the system that we have coming down the road, all of a sudden be worth a fortune to your country because that person found free energy. You understand what they're saying? They're saying the value of things that, if you're going to be honest about it, and you understand what has value, the stock market manipulator has no value to you. The lawyer has no value to you. The people that are making a tremendous amount of money, they have no value to you. They're not doing anything but moving money around. And that's why they told you that money can be moved around. So, to get and they want you to get that concept real clear. So to get it clear, they say you can use tons of coal to make a spoon and call yourself a manufacturer. There's a balance here. You must increase the value of natural resources while using the least amount of natural resources to accomplish the task. What do you create, and what is the total cost to our country? That's the balance. That's the balance. What has value? Things that are being made have value. Things that are being grown have value. Things that are taking natural resources and changing them to something that has value has value. There are a tremendous amount of things in this country that are being paid for that have absolutely no value. There are many trinkets that are perceived as necessary and thus valuable. In truth, the wealth of our example country is increased only as the value of its natural resources are increased. Only. See? As you begin to see that the value of you want to take a look at a diamond? A diamond coming out of the ground is a pretty flunky looking thing. It has very little value. You get an expert diamond cutter, and all of a sudden you have a diamond, and we consider that tremendously valuable. That's not that a diamond has any value, but that's an example. If you handed somebody a diamond, the average person would look at it and say, "That's cute." In its form, it's worthless to them. In the form of a diamond, it's worth all kinds of stuff then, even though diamonds aren't worth really anything anyway. Diamonds are the ability to move wealth around, that's all. So, in truth, the wealth of our example countries increase only as the value of its natural resources are increased. Okay, then who are the producers of wealth? The miners take our resources out of the ground and begin the process of increasing their value. Subtract from that value the fact that the resources are not going to be used and thus are gone, that whatever they're mining is gone, the depreciation of the equipment used to get it out, the costs and wages, and you have an idea how much value they create. So, looking at that, there isn't a whole lot of value you'd think, but that's what makes our country wealthy. All these other things that you think make our country wealthy don't. The manufacturer takes a resource from the miner and others and adds value to them as they manufacture their items. Subtract from that the value of the resources used in the manufacturing process to make other items, the depreciation of equipment, the wages, and the cost of pollution that's been created, and you begin to see the value that was actually created. You also could subtract the perceived value that are, in truth, trinkets of the game players. So if you took away all the perceived value and just got down to what's really has value, you begin to see what the game players are doing, and you begin to see, it's like, is this thing, I don't even know what example to use, what thing that they want to, well, we'll let them do it. They say next comes the farmer and the growers of all kinds. They take the soil and seed and harness the renewable sun's energy to grow all manner of things. That's people that grow trees and food and all kinds of stuff. The percentage of available energy converted to our wealth is very low at this time, but as we begin to understand the concept, perhaps this will change. The subtraction comes from the cost to our resources from fertilizers, chemicals, pollution, equipment, and fuel, and labor, of course, of a farmer. So you have the plus side of the food and the negative side of the costs that the natural resources use in fertilizer. And, So the next group are those who find ways to harness our natural resources more efficiently. With less loss, the gain in wealth is obvious. This group works in many fields of endeavor and often is hand in hand with those that we discussed above. They may be hard to differentiate from those who create wealth, but basically they make the creation of wealth more efficient with less waste through invention. They are the ones who use their mind to create value. If focused properly, they have very little subtraction from their effort in relation to pollution or non-renewable natural resources and things like that. So this group is a pretty important group, and they are in the productive class. So as we go to the next classification, you'll see that the line of demarcation is, they say a little blurred. I would say very blurred. It's hard to tell one from the other. And ultimately, they say it doesn't really make any difference. Some could fall in either group at any given time. The classification is just there so you get a feel for who you should be paying. Really, that's what they're saying is who should you be honoring, who should you be supporting, who should you be paying. Second group is the service group. That group is, what they do is they help the first group get their job done faster, more easily, more efficient, and with less loss of resources. This service group is huge in size, even when you consider that many who seem to be in this classification are instead truly in the last classification. The service classification increases wealth of this country, this example country, in an indirect manner. If a farmer had to repair all his own equipment, haul all of his own fertilizer from wherever the fertilizer came from, chemicals from the source, and do all the other little tasks, there wouldn't be any time for him to farm. Thus, in an indirect manner, the service class increases the wealth by assisting and supporting those who create the wealth. So this group isn't really creating the wealth. They're just helping the people that do create the wealth, and that's critical. I mean, the one doesn't happen if you don't have the other. So two groups that you need and two groups you should be rewarding. So they say the measure of any one unit in this group is difficult at best. They reduce our natural resources to perform the tasks. The benefit of their effort is hard to measure, leaving us to use like an educated guess as to what value they have. Still, most do benefit those they help and thus fall into this class. Who are they? They're the truckers and the bankers and the laborers of all kinds, the doctors, police officers, builders, teachers, anybody that is helping those who are creating something or create something as well. Those who are creating something in this class, they're helping get that work done. And if they make it easier for the creators of wealth, then they're in that class and they need to be seen for who they are and what they do and rewarded. The third class is the burden class. Now, there are people who work 80 hours a week that know exactly who they are. In the economic sense, only this group becomes economic burden. They use or spend or in some way reduce the wealth of this example country. They include our retired mothers and fathers, non-working, handicapped children, many government workers, and others. As you can see, economically speaking, these people are a burden. They don't produce anything, and they don't help those that do. And again, immediately they go into the, now remember that we haven't got into the moral and ethical questions. We haven't put that into the economy yet. So they just want you to see that the retired people and the retired people and children and the handicapped, they're not producing anything. The military, a great deal of the military is not producing anything. So they become the burden class. Now you see why they're saying it's a classification, not a class of people. I mean, come on, your mother and father, your grandmother and grandfather earned the right to retire. So they don't produce anything, they don't help those that do, they just consume what's produced. So the first two classes of people in this example country support this third class of people. You have to understand that. There are others in this class, like those who are on welfare, and we'll get to them later, but you can easily see there must be a lot of wealth created in the first two classes of people if they can support themselves and this third class of people too. And then they come up with another, supposed to be three, but they have another group of people that they just had to get to. And they say finally we come to the last class of people in our example economic country. They are those who not only don't produce wealth or help produce it, but actually impede the process of increasing wealth. Most of them are in government positions and are well paid to do their job. Economically speaking, this group is a triple burden on our economy. First, they don't produce anything, nor do they help produce anything. Second, and that puts them in the burden class. Second, they are paid at least 4 times as much as, and often a lot more than that, than anybody in the anybody else in the burden class. They're in the burden class, but they're being paid. They're not earning it. They're just being given welfare like 4, 5, 6, 10 times what the people in the burden class get. Thus, they use 4 times as much of our wealth, making them even a greater burden. And then lastly, they disrupt or stop others who are in the process of creating wealth needed to pay this group. 3 negatives, economically speaking. So now they say we've got a fairly good understanding of what wealth is and how it's created. And we're also beginning to understand how people in this example country of ours are in classifications relating to economics only now. The need at this point is to modify each classification by adding morality and or ethics into the class. The concept here is to understand the need of man in relation to this work. We need to take care of our mothers and fathers who have retired and do it in an acceptable and honorable way. We need to stop seeing them as a burden and see that they have earned the right to retire in some form of comfort. We need to take care of our children since there's no way for them to take care of themselves. I mean, we know that we need to take care of the children. The retired mothers and fathers are starting to take a beating by the overchargers, but we could hope that's going to change. We need to take care of the handicapped and injured because they can't take care of themselves. That's obvious. And I don't know anybody that wants to say, well, if you're handicapped, you just go somewhere and die. That's not the way Americans are. That's not the way this country is. So, economically speaking, sure, they're a burdened class, but they need to be taken care of. We need to take care of anybody that can't work, and that's going to change with the legal system and the government system and all the different things that are changing in Book 4, so that everybody will work that can, and work will be involving creating wealth, if you want to look at it that way. And that includes the mothers that stay home and nurture their children to the point where they become creative people in our country that could be our most valuable resource. So things are changing. You're not going to have you're not going to have two parents working, and that's going to change the job availability, and it's going to change our whole view of raising children. It's how we ever got to the point where we put the labor of a man on the economic market, and then how we ever put the raising of children to be a third-rate job. The overchargers did it. The overchargers advertised it. The overchargers made it happen. Yay, overchargers, you did a beautiful job. You conned all these people, but these people aren't stupid. And when they start seeing the truth, you're going to be on the run. And so, going back to the people who can't work, that's going to change to the point where they'll be able to work. They'll be working. And everybody that wants to share in this country's bounty will work unless they're unable or are wealthy enough not to have to work. So you have all these people working, and when that happens, you're guaranteed food, clothing, housing, medical attention, education, a job that pays enough to cover the foregoing. In other words, they have a minimum for each person in this country, and it's related to labor, which is no longer for sale. So you have, minimum wages, if you look at it that way. Basically, the minimum wage is going to go up and up and up as we begin to put these things into effect, because we're going to end up, the average person, will end up with more and more money. And when somebody says, well, you're going to have to pay for this person who's been in a car accident or something, you say, well, we can do that. We've got a lot more money now. Which means that you get to the point where you have choices that you make. And that's the thing that's been missing. You get to the point where you're making choices about what you have. You have money, so you make choices. So then they go on and say the problem is that we don't admit that we were giving a minimum level to all the people in some manner. We are right now doing that, and the failure to face that fact costs us 100 times what it would if we did. Admit that we take care of a person in some manner when he doesn't work. Admit that we take care of a person, a child, who's can't take care of himself. Admit that we take care of the retired people. Admit that we take care of people that were sick. Any and all we're taken care of, and it might be by hospital bills being unpaid at this point in time, which is going to change. It might be the donation of the church, which passes that on to the individual. What are they saying? They're saying there are hundreds of places where people are taking care of the people that have to be taken care of, and it's costing us too much. It's overlapping, and people not doing, and people doing, and they're like saying, why don't we just admit that we take care of the people that aren't working? Why don't we admit that we're taking care of the people that are sick? Why don't we admit it? Why don't we admit that we're taking care of people that are in car accidents or have drug problems or have legal problems? Why don't we admit it and just go ahead and take it, pay it? It'll be a lot cheaper than all these side streets that we're on all the time, overlapping in places where people aren't being taken care of, and it's insane. All of the insanity seems to come from advertisement, that all of it seems to come from the overcharges, and all of it seems to come from their need to get the money from us and put it in their pocket. And then what do they do with it? They just say they've got it. Do they add to the economy? Do they create more value to the country? Do they create wealth in any way? No, they don't. You would say some of them do by investing, and that's true. But if you had the investing system the way it's supposed to be, it'd be banks investing in your community and building businesses properly, instead of investing in things that we don't need and making legal laws so that the pollution isn't pinned on the person that's causing it. And, all of the areas that we have that are negative, they all come back to this specific thing. Why don't we admit that we take care of all these people and take care of them? Why don't we admit that we're not paying our farmers, our miners, our manufacturers? We're paying somebody that's just transferring money, transferring wealth from your pocket to his, and he's not doing anything. And as you get to the point where you look at each individual and you say, what are you doing that is producing wealth in this country? Now we know how wealth is produced. You got to be making something out of natural resources. And 90% of these well-paid people aren't. They're not doing anything to the natural resources. So you begin to say, well, wait a minute. If you're not increasing our wealth, why are we paying you so much? Get you back down to, like minimum wage. Get you down to the level where people should be that aren't doing anything that's beneficial. Welfare people. Because that's what you are. These people that can take this tremendous amount of money playing their games, they're welfare people. They're being paid for doing absolutely nothing. And they're or sometimes even double welfare or triple welfare. They're not doing anything that's beneficial to the wealth of this country or us.